My name's Donald Pfanz. I'm the staff historian here at Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. We're now standing in front of Chatham, which is not only the park headquarters, but one of the most historic houses in America.
Tell us why it's so historic.
Well, the house is historic for a lot of different reasons. First of all, by the number of important people that came here. This is the only house in America that we know of that both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln went into during their lifetimes. But in addition to them, we had guests such as Thomas Jefferson, Robert E. Lee, Clara Barton, Walt Whitman, and even George Marshall.
What happened at this house around the Fredericksburg battle?
During the Battle of Fredericksburg, this house had been abandoned. It was the home prior to that of a man who went into the Confederate Army, James Horace Lacey, but his family and he were long since gone, and the house at this point was taken over by the Northern Army, which used it as a headquarters, a hospital, and between the campaigns as a picket outpost. During the battle itself, on December 13th, this building was used by General Edwin Sumner, who commanded the right wing of the Union Army, roughly 30,000 soldiers, the ones who attacked the stone wall at Fredericksburg. So while they're making those attacks, Sumner's monitoring those attacks from this house and issuing orders from here. Chatham was built on the bluffs overlooking the Rappahannock River and the city of Fredericksburg. As you can see, it has a very commanding view of the town. It was that same commanding position that made it such a valuable artillery position during the Battle of Fredericksburg. While there was no artillery directly in front of the building here, the bluffs on this side of the river were used by the Union Army, who posted 147 cannon on them. You can see one of those cannon behind me today. This is the largest type of cannon that the Union Army employed at Fredericksburg. It's a 4.5-inch siege rifle and was employed by the Union Army just a little bit down the river at Ferry Farm, which was where George Washington grew up.
What do you suppose the commanders would have seen here on that during the battle?
Sumner would have wanted to cross the river, but General Burnside told him that he couldn't cross the river because he knew Sumner was very rash and impetuous and might get himself killed. So he told Sumner to stay on this side of the river, so Sumner moved up basically as close as he could get without disobeying Burnside's orders. So he made his headquarters here at the house, observed the battle from here, but exactly how much he could see is open to question because in Fredericksburg there is a slight ridge between here and the Confederate position, and Sumner probably couldn't have seen very well past that ridge to where the actual battle was taking place. As the casualties began to mount, many of those men were brought back across the river, and at that point Chatham was going to be turned into a field hospital for one of the divisions in Sumner's unit, and for the next couple of weeks it's going to be crowded with hundreds of Union soldiers suffering from all sorts of wounds. And it's at that time that Clara Barton and Walt Whitman arrived. Clara Barton had actually been here prior to the battle, specifically to help out with the wounded once the fighting occurred. But and when the fighting was taking place, she actually stood on the porch of this building and watched the fighting from down below. But as the fighting mounted on December the 13th, she was called across the river and was there for a couple of days helping out with the wounded in the town. But then when the Union Army retreated, she came back to Chatham and spent the next several days working here amongst the wounded. Now Walt Whitman, he's a little bit different story. Whitman came here not so much to help the wounded, but really to find one of the wounded, and that man was his brother. His brother had been shot through the face during the Battle of Fredericksburg, and Whitman, seeing his name on a casualty list back up in Brooklyn, decided to rush down here and see if his brother was okay. So he arrived here a few days after the battle, and as it turns out, even though he was shot through the cheek, his brother actually was doing pretty well. But Whitman said, well, since I'm here and it's almost Christmas, I'll spend a few days with my brother, see what the Army life is like. And so after spending a few days with his brother, he decided to start looking around, and Army life's actually pretty boring. And so Walt Whitman decided to visit some of the hospitals as a little diversion. And so he walked across the fields to Chatham and spent the next few hours just kind of wandering around the house, talking with not only wounded Union soldiers, but also wounded Confederates. Just kind of talking with those who needed talking to, writing letters for those who maybe couldn't write for themselves. And then when he was finished, he's going to come walking out this doorway, down the steps that were here at the time, and he leaves us a wonderful account of what he saw there. He says as he came down these front steps, he says the very first thing he saw were the fresh graves of some Union officers who had died and were buried right in the front. Then as he turned and moved from our right to left across this front, he said right next to the house was a line of bodies with blankets over them. These were soldiers who had died in the house, who had been taken out for burial, but who had not yet been buried. Then when he got a little bit farther down, where we have two old catalpa trees today, he said in front of those catalpa trees was the worst sight of all, because there between the house and the trees was what he referred to as a pile of limbs enough to fill a one-horse cart. And we know now from other sources that the room on that side of the building was in fact the surgery. And it doesn't take too much logic to realize that as the surgeons would cut off an arm and a leg, they would simply toss it out the window for somebody else to bury later on, and those limbs ultimately would gather there at that tree. So this was the sort of thing that was going on here at that time. We know that more than 130 soldiers died here and were buried helter-skelter on the grounds. The house itself was used not only as a hospital, but later by Union pickets who were guarding the river in this area. And by the time the Lacey's returned to their home in 1865, the place is no longer a grand plantation like you'll see it today. It was instead the shell of a house. It had been ransacked inside and outside. Some of the paneling had been torn down. There was graffiti on the walls, bloodstains on the floors. The whole yard was a graveyard. Most of the trees had been cut down. In short, it was a scene of desolation. And the Lacey spent several years trying to restore the house, but got it livable, but not nearly the place it had been. But ultimately they had to pay taxes, just like Scarlett O'Hara did in Gone with the Wind. And not being able to pay those taxes, they ultimately had to sell the house and move to a different place. So the house for the next 50 years kind of was in a malaise. It was livable, but not great. But then in the 1920s, a family came in here, poured lots of money into the house, restored it to its former grandeur. And ever since that time, Chatham has once again been one of the finest houses in America.